Min, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
For our audience, Min is a second-year HBS student, and we're going to talk specifically about your expertise, your experience prior to HBS, which is in branding and marketing. And so for our listeners, perhaps those who are more entrepreneurial-minded, I think for them, let's make the case on how marketing and branding is as critical as is to the technology, to the operations piece of any business.
Let's do it. I'm excited.
So let's dive in. Yeah. Why did you go into kind of this focus of branding and marketing?
Yeah, there's a couple of reasons. So I went to Yale University. I majored in psychology, and I was pretty interested in consumer psychology about how decisions are made in the marketplace. There weren't that many classes I could take at Yale that were specifically about marketing and advertising, but still wanted to kind of be in that space. So was lucky enough to land an internship at PepsiCo after my junior year. And I really liked, it was surprising in the way that, PepsiCo's marketing isn't just kind of creating advertising campaigns and marketing campaigns. It's about, how to drive innovation, like innovation in the PepsiCo sense is like products, how to launch new products into the marketplace, how to manage the hundreds of customers, which are, your Walmarts, your Targets, your Dollar Generals, and how to basically maintain a relationship with them so that they take more of our products, sell more of our products, so that it, boosts our revenue. So it was a very new look at marketing and the consumer world. So got hooked into it. I loved how I could kind of take my creative side and put it into branding and drive business results. And I was lucky enough to get a full-time offer, came onto the Mountain Dew team as a commercial analyst, which is part of their marketing team. And yeah, it was kind of a lucky progression of things. And I couldn't have been more lucky to have been part of PepsiCo, which is like one of the biggest Fortune 500 companies in the world, where they, manage $22 billion brands.
Absolutely.
That's kind of how I got into it, and I stayed for the ride. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, we did actually also in our first year. I believe is in our strategy class.
The cola challenge.
Yes, we did for HBS students in our first year, we have a case about the Coca-Cola Pepsi versus Pepsi wars.
Did you do it?
I didn't drink. Okay. I didn't do the drink. Three other very excited people.
All right.
Enthusiastically.
Did they get it right?
One person got one right.
Okay. I also did it. And I got it wrong. I got
Well, I think that makes sense because the professor knew your class card and knew you worked at Pepsi.
Yeah,
right?
But I still failed to determine between the Pepsi and the Coke, which was very sad. But it was
very sad. Yeah, I had one person in my section worked for Coca-Cola. Actually,
interesting.
So.
I don't see a lot of those here.
Yeah,
a lot more Pepsi here.
Interesting. Well, let's dive in. I know we'll talk about briefly Pepsi. And your thoughts on Pepsi, but. It's it's the duopoly of Coke and Pepsi, at least right now in the marketplace. What was kind of your mindset about kind of like the market conditions of these two major brands? Like how these two, before it's just Coke, but now it's Coke and Pepsi. How long do you expect this kind of duopoly, perhaps in this market condition, to continue?
Right. I think we learned that in the strategy class about Pepsi and Coke. The duopoly is the reason that both of these companies are wildly successful. I think as one of the biggest CPG companies, they need each other to push them to innovate and constantly think about the cutting edge of consumer behavior. When I was at Pepsi, one of the things that we were always kind of thinking about was KO, which is the ticker for Coca-Cola. So even if we got, a 0.1 lead on share or revenue points, we'd be like, yes, we beat KO this quarter or this period by this much. And that was kind of the driving force. So if you look at the portfolio of each company, at least on the beverage side, Coke, Pepsi, what is it? Sprite with Starry, which is a new product for Pepsi. Life Water, Smart Water. So there's always these competing products, and PepsiCo very much looks to Coca-Cola for, inspiration, I would say, but also making sure that we are ahead of them in certain ways. And I think PepsiCo prides itself in its ability to turn around innovation. So I would say, compared to Coca-Cola, PepsiCo does a great job at um, looking at white spaces in consumer behavior and kind of creating new products for it. So Mountain Dew is a prime example of that. They create new innovations, I think 3 to 4 every year, just like
Wow.
what they call LTOs, which is limited time offerings.
Mm.
And these are just like flavors. So Baja Blast used to be an LTO for Mountain Dew. Now it's a partnership with Taco Bell.
Yep.
Things like Voodoo, which is like a Halloween special flavor. So I think the duopoly really helps PepsiCo stay on top of its game. And I would say that, to kind of answer your question, I would hope that there's this competition for perpetuity, because
Yeah.
without each other, I don't think there would have been as much innovation and thinking about consumer and what consumers want.
Absolutely. There were some also controversies, and we
Yeah.
can, with Pepsi. I mean, I don't know if you were there when I don't know if it was the Super Bowl ad, but the
Are you
whole,
referring to the Kendall Jenner
yes,
ad?
exactly.
Okay.
What was kind of the mindset from within that, as much as you can share? As like, because did they think of it as like, oh, this is going to be fine, and then like the
Right.
reaction afterwards? I assume there would be like, what is it like? They would have gauged it, right? They would have
Right.
done testing.
So here, I don't. To be clear,
You're not
for the
on it.
podcast for purpose of the company,
Not responsible.
I don't speak for Pepsi. I don't speak for their legal team. I don't
Of course.
speak for their PR team. I'm no longer part of that company. I think from what I've heard, so I wasn't part of the team at all
Right.
when that happened. I think it happened when I was interning there.
Got it.
It had already happened after I had interned. So from what I heard, it wasn't an initiative that was led by the US team. So from, I think what I've heard, and this is very, very up for interpretation, is that it was headed by the global marketing team. So
Interesting.
I specifically work for the U.S. Beverages division, but there's a global marketing division, which does like Europe and all these other regions. They kind of looked at the U.S. market and said, Kendall Jenner at the time was a very prominent figure, a prominent, well-liked celebrity. They also saw that there were some, racial tensions going on in the United States.
Yeah.
And then they, I think, very innocently thought that, combining those two would result in a message that was solidarity, unity or whatever. And it didn't have the messaging that they wanted to have.
Of course, yeah.
And, when I talked to the CMO, kind of addressed the intern class when I was interning there and said, we own up to that mistake. We're accountable for that mistake. And how do we go forward as brands?
Yeah.
So, it was a blip in PepsiCo's business. I think at the end of the day, people still remember it, but it's still a wildly successful business. And
absolutely,
marketing is such a fickle beast. You would do all this research, all this hundreds of thousands of dollars of consumer research, and do testing on these ads and say, wow, this performed really well in our consumer testing, and then you put it out into the market and it flops and you get beaten down for it. So I think it was just one of those cases, and I respect the team for making it and owning up to the mistakes that they made.
Absolutely. And when you're such a big organization and you're in the scales of tens of billions of dollars every single year, there's no way you're not going to make some sort of mistake.
Right.
Obviously, they've owned up to it. So the important thing is growing past it. And it is
they've
interesting.
moved on from it, hopefully.
Absolutely. It is interesting that the global team did it and not the US, because I certainly think the US team would have
maybe there was some sort of involvement, but obviously I wasn't on the ground.
Wasn't on,
so,
But let's dive in a little bit more broadly. I mean, tell us a little about the work that you did in your 3 years there, and how did you grow? What are kind of the interesting things you worked on?
I would say PepsiCo was a great place to start my career. When I entered, there was kind of this rotation program where you kind of go through. So what they were aiming for was depth and breadth. So for 1 year, you are on a brand team, and you work on a certain function. So at the time, before the reorg, there were 3 functions: commercial, innovation, and communication. So commercial, which was my first role at the time, was on the Mountain Dew team, and it really is based on business analysis. So every week I kind of looked at the business as a whole. So PepsiCo or Mountain Dew had a bunch of different lines, so Code Red, I don't know what the other ones were called, but there were so many product lines that were performing at different levels. So I'm looking at revenues, I'm looking at in-store sales, I'm looking at distribution, I'm looking at velocity to make sure that are there any red flags in terms of gaps in distribution? Is there slowdown in velocity in certain regions? So that was kind of my first foray into the business of like knowing the business cold is what they say at PepsiCo. And then the second one is innovation, which is basically launching new products. And that was on our joint venture with Unilever and their Lipton partnership with PepsiCo. So I was on the Pure Leaf team, which is like a tea brand that is loved by many 30 to 40-year-old women in the United States.
There we go.
And so one of the projects I was working on was launching a cold brew tea, which is one of the first to market. So that involved working with procurement, supply chain, FP&A, and just making sure that if we launch this product, it's going to be successful, and how do we market it in the way that our consumers love. And then the third role that you get is communication, and you can mix up the order as well, but that was on the Life Water team, which is like the smart water competitor, and that was doing communications, which is your kind of typical advertising and marketing. So I did social media campaigns. I did TV ads. I did different social media campaigns and e-com ads and stuff like that. So that was like the sexy quote unquote part of the job. And after that rotation, you can be promoted into manager level. And before that, I left the company. So
it's a long rotational program.
So it's a 3-year program, and I think for anyone who is an undergrad thinking about the marketing world, it was an incredible way to get a sense of how a company like PepsiCo works, because you really get exposed to all parts of the business. And people think that marketing is just like going to sets and like filming things, but surprisingly, PepsiCo doesn't really shoot any of its own ads. Like a small part of it does, but we really outsource it to third-party agencies. So yeah.
Why is that the approach? Why outsource? Why not do things in-house?
I think our expertise is, I would say, like strategy and decision making. The third party, or like the vendors and the agencies that we work with, have expertise in being creative, having creative briefs and executing on those briefs. So we do have PepsiCo at the time had a creators league studio, which did smaller scale ads or smaller scale productions, but we knew our strengths and we knew our weaknesses, and to better allocate resources and our talents, it was more based on like, we were focused on who's the consumer, what do we serve to them, and what do we make for them so that they love our brands even more. And then the execution of it was for the agencies.
Very cool. And with the rise of social media and technology, we also, within the space that Pepsi and Coca-Cola serves, there are now these brand new upstart companies, right? And a lot of those are started like Celsius. Right. There's also the energy drink segment, Monster, Red Bull, and then there's also the new ones that Logan Paul, I think, has one. I forgot exactly what it's called.
Influencer brands.
Yeah, the influencer brands that everyone's doing. Yeah. What are your thoughts on kind of all this, not fragmentation, because the duopoly is still there, but it seems that this new segment, influencer-led, branded, Mr. I don't know if Mr. Beast has one as well, sure, but does. Is this, what are your thoughts on that? And like, are they chipping away briefly, not like as a consolidated entity, but like just kind of more of a so many happening?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, these influencers and celebrity figures are really good at what they do, and they're really good at branding themselves. And because that they are good at that, they have an incredible following, and whatever they launch, people will strive for it. At the end of the day, they're not Pepsi or they're not Coca-Cola, right? One of the biggest assets that Pepsi and Coke have is the distribution system and the relationships they have with the Walmarts, the Costco's, the Targets. And because the food and beverage business is such a low margin business, if you don't have distribution, if you don't have velocity, you're not going to be a profitable business at all. So you could say like, Emma Chamberlain and her coffee did wildly successful because she has a brand, she has an incredible following.
Right.
But in the long run, if she's not able to maintain those relationships with, you know, a Walmart or a Costco, which is an incredibly taxing and incredibly, you know, effort requiring job, I don't think those brands are meant to, you know, last a long time. So that's not to say that in terms of categories in general. So you mentioned Monster and Celsius. Energy was a very, very good, high priority for PepsiCo. And there were some limited success launches with Mountain Dew Game Fuel, which was an energy drink aimed at gamers specifically.
I know Halo.
Yeah, exactly.
Back in 2007, everyone remembers.
Exactly. And then they relaunched that back in like 2019. They had a short stint with, I believe, Rockstar for a distribution partnership that was limited in success. I don't know really what happened to it. So I think PepsiCo is still figuring out its energy portfolio and energy strategy. But these categories are very important to them. And recently they launched Starry, which is their lemon lime drink. It's like a competitor to Sprite, basically, because we don't have a lemon lime product per se. So they're constantly thinking about entering new categories and making sure that these products are going to become the next billion-dollar brand. But in terms of these influencer brands, I think we notice it. Yeah, we recognize it and acknowledge it. But at the end of the day, these teams do not have like hundreds of people working for them, you know, just to get a meeting with Walmart in, which is a hard thing to do. So yeah,
absolutely. Well, diving a little bit back into like the success of Pepsi, and especially over the last decade and a half, of course, is, as we learn at HBS, is the importance of leadership.
Yes.
And under, I believe, the tenure of Indra, right?
Yes.
You know, certainly has had a lot of success. Some things more mixed. I know there was an expansion towards food as well, snacks. But was she there? Was she CEO during part of the time that you were there?
She was CEO for like about maybe 2 months after I joined. She was there when I was interning.
Right.
And then she retired after like 3 months on the job for me.
So what was kind of your experience briefly under her leadership and the culture of it? And then perhaps in the roughly 3 years after she left, you had a new, you know, leadership, new culture. How was the difference? Right?
Yeah. So I didn't obviously work directly with Indra.
Of course.
But I can speak to kind of the aftermath, or like when she announced her retirement.
Right.
The vibes I got from the office, and I was talking to different people who had been there for like as long as Indra was, and they, from what I could gather, really respected her, and she was one of the most successful CEOs that PepsiCo had. And this transition for PepsiCo into better for you and healthier categories of products was a foresight that Indra had that really catapulted the company into a category that, you know, a lot of companies didn't see coming. So her work ethic, her ability to in such a male-dominated world where still PepsiCo's executives are very, very, you know, male, she was able to kind of break that ceiling and kind of get to the CEO position. So there was a lot of respect for Indra, and I you know, I respect her in that sense as well. I can't say more to that because I don't know where her working style was.
Right, you weren't quite there yet. You know, at the executive
I waved
level.
high at her when she was, you know, she was retiring. But the 3 years after that I was there, we had a new CEO, Ramon Lacuarta, and I don't think 3 years was enough for me to kind of evaluate what our CEO, how he did. I can't really speak to like any specific, you know, big changes that he implemented other than some restructuring of the organization. But I know that a lot of the company was very hopeful for this new leadership. I think Indra had been there for like 12 years as a CEO.
Which is pretty long.
And I think people were excited by the new and fresh perspective that Ramon was going to bring, and seems to be doing well. They're launching into new categories, new products, so I'm excited for them.
Yeah. Before we get into your next experience in alcohol, you know, as you mentioned earlier, Indra's focus was kind of this be healthier focus in terms of predicting the trend of where things go. You know, what are your kind of thoughts on the future of kind of like the beverage business as
Yeah.
it relates to the traditional lines of, Pepsi,
Yeah.
even Mountain Dew,
Yeah.
the sugary drinks,
Yeah.
which a lot of consumers perhaps are becoming more health conscious,
Right.
even if a solid core segment will always,
Yeah.
maintain that.
Yeah. I think to your point, if you think about the regular Pepsis, the regular Mountain Dews that are not, diet or zero sugar, there will always be a market for it. Maybe it's plateauing in growth a little bit, maybe, but what we call, guiltless enjoyment or just like indulgence of these products is always going to be there. Even if you're super healthy and super, conscious about your health, you're going to enjoy a can of Coke or a can of Pepsi once in a while, right?
Yeah.
So that market's always going to be there. I think PepsiCo and other these big conglomerates are very smart to recognize that there is this consumer trend towards, especially after COVID, towards health conscious eating, health conscious, consumptions of these products. So you're seeing, Pepsi really put a lot of money and effort into their Pepsi Zero Sugar campaigns. Diet Pepsi is one of the biggest products that we have. Sometimes it outperformed regular Pepsi from when I was there. Even Mountain Dew, which is like one of the most sugary products that you can find at PepsiCo, is going for zero sugar, and they have all these other products that are more less bad for you. But I think they have to, I think they were even when I was there, they very much recognized the rise of this health conscious consumption. So, when I was there, what we were focusing on was functional beverages. So, when I was on Life Water, like water is water, right? What can you do with it?
Right.
Life Water, it was a premium water that did reverse osmosis, but one of the next things that we did was zinc infused water. Was it zinc? Yeah. And it has, certain benefits to your body. You would have to drink a lot of the water too.
Right.
But it's still zinc,
Right.
And that's where the marketing comes in. So I think a lot of these beverage companies especially, and you've seen the rise of the Olipops of the world, the Poppies of the world, where it's focusing on probiotics, prebiotics, functional. So we were messing around with ideas like ashwagandha, like turmeric in our teas. So I think PepsiCo is still thinking about that. I think the consumer is becoming very, very health conscious. And not only that, but they're becoming very knowledgeable about these things. So I think at least 5 years ago, I would read something and say oh, probiotics are good for me, and I'll drink it. But now it's more of what's in the product that's good for me, right? I'm reading the label, I'm reading the ingredients and doing my own research of which probiotic. So you're dealing with a more informed and educated consumer, and that's going to be interesting to see how these companies deal with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's dive into your next experience because you shifted from regular drinks to fancier
sugary drinks to fermented sugary drinks.
Fermented sugary drinks. So what was you just finished your rotational program, 3 years roughly, and then you opted to transition to a brand new company in a more senior role, of course. What was the mindset behind the reason for your slight shift?
Yeah. So it's not when the rotation program ends, it's oh, you're done with the program, congratulations. It's more you're in the role for a little bit longer than you used to be, and now you're thinking about the next steps. You're talking to HR about what roles are open. So I was talking to HR at the time, and there weren't that many. This was also in the middle of COVID. This is 2020,
right?
October, September. Yeah. So we were in lockdown. I was working from home, and I was getting the itch. I was 3 years, long time. I feel at Pepsi, I'm used to the ways of working here, and I was looking for a new challenge, right? And so I wasn't actively recruiting because I still really love the team and the mentorship that I was having at Pepsi. But personally, I was how can I challenge myself to become, a better business person and a better brand manager? And this role at Moet Hennessy came up. I applied, just kind of oh, whatever, I'll do it. And then luckily I got an interview, and the more I learned about the role, the more excited I got about it. I think the three main things was that it was a new consumer, it was a new, supply chain logistics kind of situation. And it was an entirely new brand for me. Beverages, you're going from, the Pure to Mountain Dew to Life Water. It's all beverages, and the supply chain is more or less similar, right? With champagne, you're working with vineyards all across the world, not sorry, across the world in, Epernay, where you're working with vintners to kind of import the, champagne. The supply chain was very interesting to me. Consumers were very interesting to me. Especially during COVID. I don't know if you know, but like alcohol consumption went through the roof because people were, I guess, stressed.
Right.
So it was an exciting time to be a part of a wine and spirits brand.
Yeah.
The manager that I would have been working with when I was interviewing, I really liked him as well. So I was like, and I talked to my mentors at Pepsi where I was like, hey, I have this new opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think? And to my surprise, they were like, hey, like, go challenge yourself, go push yourself and jump. So that's what I did. And I joined Moet Hennessy in September of 2021, which was a fun time. But I was there for a very short time.
Right. Just under a year, like a few months short, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Then you had to come back to school, right?
I did.
Well, let's dive a little bit into kind of like the trends for alcohol, Yeah, there's also, this slew of celebrities that also are, branding themselves.
Right.
I think George Clooney, The Rock, they're all doing tequila brands. Even Kendall Jenner, who we were talking about earlier, I think she has a tequila brand as well. So what's kind of the focus? Because Moet does have a decent market share. They're a well-established company in the space.
Yeah.
What was kind of your experience working for such an established brand?
Yeah.
Luxury brand, especially of champagne, and kind of this wider market of alcohol.
Just a little plug for Moet and Chandon. They're the number 1 champagne in the world, and they're the number 2 brand in the United States, I think, as far as I know. The trends we saw, at least from when I was there, was you're coming off of this like huge influx of alcohol consumption in homes where you are able to order through Drizzlies and Uber Eats, get alcohol to deliver to your home. Coming out of COVID with, outdoor dining and kind of all these events coming back to life, our kind of priority was how do we get people to drink champagne, not on occasions where champagne is justified. Right. So, you drink champagne on your birthday, graduation, New Year's, all these like big holiday events. And so our priority was how do we de-occasionalize the champagne category and occasions to make sure that you drink it on a dinner, like a night out with your friends, or like at a dinner, or with your just like mom or dad, like at home. So making sure that champagne is, consumed not during those kind of signature events was kind of our priority. And for brands like Moet and Chandon, it's an old brand. It's founded in 1742. It's been around for more than 300 years. How do we make it more relevant to the younger consumers who are coming into adulthood? They can drink. If we don't capture like Gen Zs per se, we're not going to be able to, get a lot more out of these people who are kind of aging out of the drinking age. So making sure that we have the right partnerships, right collaborations, right events in place. So one of the biggest things that I worked on when I was at Moet was the NBA partnerships, because we said, NBA is a celebration of excellence, integrity, and dedication to a sport. In similar ways, Moet and Chandon is dedicated to excellence in its own way of, highest quality champagnes, the process and the craftsmanship of making a champagne bottle. So we had a partnership with them. We went to, All-Star Weekend, and had a lot of activations in that way. And yeah, I think those were kind of the trends that we were thinking about. And kind of beyond that is, I think, which was interesting to me, was climate change, because the supply chain is so dependent on having high yield vineyards and high quality vineyards. The what is it? Grape growing season in Champagne in France was being affected by global climate change. So we were very kind of cognizant of the fact that if we don't make steps right now as a company to mitigate the risks of those, we might have limited productions like 50, 100 years down the road. So yeah,
absolutely. What was kind of the mindset, I guess, from the company's perspective, as you mentioned, of millennials and Gen Z, because over the last few decades, even, right, the demographic trends of like Gen X and millennials and to Gen Z is relative alcohol consumption has decreased.
Right.
Generation to generation, minus perhaps this recent spike was COVID.
Right.
And now there's the rise of non-alcoholic drinks, being a bigger and bigger segment of consumption. How is that taken into account for Moet?
Yeah, the non-alcoholic trend is very interesting. As a champagne brand that naturally is, alcoholic, that was a challenge for us. We had to recognize that there is a group of those people, but I think it wasn't a matter of like how do we challenge that and how do we stop that from happening. It was more like how do we adapt our brands to be like, you can not drink, but you can also drink, this wonderful champagne. Our target demographic at the end of the day is, later 20s. If you think about your 20s, like early 20s, you're not going to be drinking a $70 bottle of champagne for no reason, right?
For sure.
So we're focusing on the older 20s where you're actually kind of coming into your adulthood, like you're celebrating milestones in your life, like a new promotion or a new job, things like that. So we want to focus on penetrating that occasion a little bit more than thinking about, where the losses can be with the non-alcoholic movement. And I don't think this is my personal view. I don't think this was any research there, but like the non-alcoholic like segment isn't growing as fast. Maybe it is. I don't know.
Okay. Yeah. No. There was just some report on generational consumption, at least. Maybe not year over year. So it is interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess like alcohol fundamentally isn't the healthiest thing to drink. No. But, in moderation, it's fine. I mean, there was all the studies on like wine being good for you and wine not being good for you afterwards. So it is interesting. And part of that, of course, is effective marketing for any beverage, right? For yourself, why did you kind of transition to business school? Or did you do the 2+2 program where you applied during, I guess, Pepsi roughly?
Yeah, it was like right after Pepsi. It was like fall of 2021. So kind of right after Moet, or I joined Moet.
Right.
That was more of a personal decision. I had already known. So I was going to apply to business school while I was at Pepsi. Got delayed because of COVID. Test centers closed. I couldn't take a test. So it was very hard. So I delayed it by, I think, 1 or 2 years. And I went to Moet, thinking it was a more senior position, supposedly, and loved my manager, loved my team, loved the brand, loved the category and the company. But at the end of the day, I really wanted to challenge myself and grow as a brand marketer. From what I had experienced in the first 2-3 months on the job, I wasn't growing, and I said, do I stay here where I feel like I'm not growing, or do I try to find a new job 4 months in, which is kind of hard to do, or do I make this jump to business school where which is what I've already wanted to do, and see if I can pivot into something new. So it was a personal decision. It was kind of awkward trying to be like, I'm applying to business school, I'm gonna leave after 8 months, but at the end of the day, my manager was pretty supportive of that. It was a personal decision for me. Yeah.
Of course. I guess for yourself, you're here at HBS. You're here to learn the skills, the case method. And MBA is relevant still for trying to be relevant in the 21st century.
Yeah.
What do you feel that for yourself is kind of the most important thing you're taking out of an MBA education?
Yeah. That's a good question. I have to reflect on that. MBA education. I think I came into HBS thinking I think I was prioritizing relationships at the end of the day. And I'm very grateful for my section mates and all the, queer friends that I have from Pride and ABBA and all these different communities that I'm part of. So I'm going to value that over anything else. Because job, no job, whatever, learning or whatever, no learning, these relationships, I hope, are going to last me a lifetime. And that's what matters in my life, at least. sure, I learned a thing or two, hopefully.
Of course, in the classroom.
And I do think the HBS case method is really good at like kind of, at least for someone like me who in jobs prior, I was kind of very shy about kind of voicing my opinion. That was a feedback that I had. And it kind of forces you to kind of think on your feet a little bit and kind of participate in a productive way. Sometimes you just have to participate because you have to participate. But that kind of mindset of like, you know, your opinion still matters and kind of you have to contribute to a larger, broader conversation is something I'm going to get away with. Obviously, on top of that, all the tangible learnings that I had about, you know, finance and strategy and, you know, entrepreneurship is going to be good for me, hopefully, later down the road.
Absolutely. Well, let's dive into the future.
Yeah.
You've done 4 years in branding and marketing in beverage companies. What do you plan or what do you want to go into after the MBA education? You're graduating this spring. What's kind of the area? Are you still going to kind of focus on marketing and branding? Is that the broad industry that you're kind of personally very interested in pursuing?
Short answer is no. And a lot of people get surprised that I don't want to do this anymore. But I think being at big companies like PepsiCo and LVMH was a very valuable experience. I think post-grad, I'm trying to pivot into investment banking. And a lot of the reasons is coming from the fact that I had exposure to some of the finance functions when I was at Pepsi and LVMH. And I was always interested in, like, how does that work? I wasn't really like doing the work because we had teams for it, but I was always interested. And kind of coming to HBS, you take, you know, finance 1, 2, and I took some other courses in it. And, you know, a lot of these transactions are far more interesting than I had anticipated it to be.
Cool.
One of the main factors, I think, is because, you know, you get to combine your quantitative and qualitative skills and kind of, you know, when you're, let's say you're trying to acquire a company, like how do you assess this company other than through your traditional DCFs and, you know, valuation techniques? And I found out through these classes that's, you know, you meet with the founders, you meet with the CEOs, you meet the executive team and the management team. It's a lot more qualitative and kind of what you believe the company to be worth. And I like that aspect about investment banking where you're meeting with these executive teams. And I would love to like be in the consumer space and advise people or companies like Pepsi where if they're trying to acquire, I don't know, an Olipop or a Poppy, like I want to be in that space and I want to be part of that transaction. It's a hard pivot. I will admit. I did not intern at an investment bank over the summer. So we'll see how that goes, but I'm still kind of pretty committed to it. And I think interviewing process and preparing for it has been kind of fun. Talking to all these industry experts has been fun for me. So fingers crossed.
Absolutely. You know, all the best, all the good luck to you.
Thank you.
That is a very interesting pivot. Yeah. But, you know, that's partly what the business school is about. It allows people an opportunity to pivot into an industry that traditionally has required an MBA.
Right.
For the two different experiences, right? Investment banking and, you know, in branding and marketing, perhaps, it has been fairly, as you mentioned, men's dominated. So this is an interesting perspective. What are your kind of thoughts? And I know you're a big proponent of DEI in the workplace, of how these big companies, whether they're an investment firm that's decades, if not centuries old, to a big CPM or CPG company, goods, company that have existed for decades, if not longer. How is the workplace able to be changed, perhaps to be more inclusive of gender, ethnicity, etc., to allow for different diverse perspectives to take place? And some might argue that's not necessary, right? It should be purely based on people's abilities, right? How well they perform their jobs. Right. And what are your kind of thoughts on that?
Yeah. That's it's a sweeping question that, you know, obviously requires years and years of effort and policy changes. I think I can only speak to, you know, CPG companies like Pepsi. I don't know what happens in investment banks. Hopefully they're diverse. But in terms of Pepsi and LVMH, I think the biggest challenge for us, it's actually marketing, I would say, is pretty female heavy too, at least at the junior levels.
Yeah.
But when you look at a broader organizational level and you look at the executive teams, you start to see less women. You start to see less people of color. You start to see white males. And so I think part of why I got into DEI was thinking like, why is that happening, right? What is the barrier to entry? For Asian Americans, which I did a lot more like kind of like personal research on, is, we make up a certain percent of the US population, but we're the least likely demographic group to get promoted into executive levels at these companies. And they call that the bamboo ceiling, right? I think there's this expectation or stereotyping that goes on in the workplace that, Asian Americans tend to be more submissive. They are, quieter. They don't really make decisions. They are followers rather than leaders. And that kind of unconscious kind of thinking and stereotype affects how, executives and HR people treat Asian Americans. Not everyone, obviously, but I think so that's kind of what I tried to change at Pepsi. At least I was part of the Asian American ERG employee resource group at Pepsi, and one of the biggest kind of efforts was to spread awareness, because the biggest feedback we got from having all these presentations and kind of educational sessions about the bamboo ceiling and the model minority myth was that like people just didn't know. They were just like, oh my God, I didn't even realize that, I had these stereotypes, right? And there's a strong psychological effect of even just like bringing to saliency an effect or psychological effect will impact change. So having that knowledge that there is bias in the world, that there's systemic kind of barriers to your promotion or your progression in a company is a strong kind of impetus for change if you're kind of willing to do it. And I think I don't know what the other question was, but just having that awareness is really important. I think in terms of, what was the other question?
Well, I think was more broadly of like how these companies can the kind of the countervailing argument against that, which a lot of proponents against or concerns about like this big DEI push has been, you're not putting in quality people, and so it's based purely on their race or their gender, and therefore the quality of work suffers in the workplace. And there was recently the big controversy, I believe was United perhaps or Delta, but there was a big push in the company for women or minority and even they mentioned like people with disabilities to be included in the workforce, and then there was a backlash, or there was at least some protests, some disagreements about that, because obviously in aviation, safety and the quality of pilots is very important. And therefore they're like, this DEI push was way too much, or the quality, the safety, the work is going to suffer as a result.
I wonder, at least, I don't know, obviously the aviation industry, but if you look at Pepsi and you kind of compare the male population, female population, or like the Asian population versus the white population of employees, I wonder what the actual difference in performance will be if you were able to really remove all of the identifying factors and just base them on performance. I don't know if there's going to be a big difference, right? And that's why I think this whole like just hire them based on merit alone is a tough argument for me to swallow, because I don't know about Asian American, like I can't speak for myself, but there's so much that privilege does for you in terms of your life. This goes to admissions to schools or admissions to companies. There's systemic barriers that you kind of face throughout your life that doesn't have anything to do with your job. That affects your ability to gain certain opportunities, gain certain access to things. So I don't know whether that is a valid argument against DEI initiatives in a lot of ways. One of the things that we try to work at Pepsi was having name blind resume reviews, because we were very cognizant of the fact that if you saw like a black woman's name on a resume, it was kind of statistically kind of likelier that you would rank them lower than if you saw a white man, right? So trying to get that kind of implemented, and I don't know if it was fully implemented by the time I left, but I do think that like this only focusing on merit kind of ignores all of the other factors in life that affects how you can perform or the access you have to things and opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, speaking of merit and success, I mean, again, based on your experience in this workspace, for many students who are interested in kind of an entrepreneurial endeavor,
Yeah.
etc., what does it take to be successful, at least in from your perspective, in the branding marketing space?
Yeah.
How important is it? What should entrepreneurs think about when they're building their product, building their service, that they maybe didn't think about before?
Yeah, because I don't see myself as entrepreneurial. I think one of the things that like they really hammered into our brains at Pepsi was like deep consumer empathy. Not just like how do they perform at grocery stores or how do they shop in grocery stores or like what do they want? Because as you can imagine, if you send out 1 million polls to consumers about like, are you likely to drink a product that's 50 grams less sugar? Like they'll say yes.
Right.
But not necessarily they're not necessarily going to do that in the marketplace. So consumers are fickle. They lie about their preferences and behaviors because they have this ideal self that they're thinking about when they answer these polls. And like, I am healthier than I think I am, whatever. But by consumer empathy, I mean kind of really doing deep consumer research about like if you have a target consumers that you're building out for. Like one of the things that we did for Mountain Dew was like we had series of interviews with people about their lives of like when do you drink Mountain Dew? Why do you drink it? Like how often do you drink it? And just kind of, and then also asking them about their lives, about like what do you do? Like what do you like to do? Like what are your hobbies? To get a holistic sense of this consumer, right? What do they like to do? What are their hobbies? What are their values? What do their futures look like? So I think sometimes entrepreneurs can get lost in their own vision of like, this is a great product because I like it.
Right.
Does the consumer really like it? Is the consumer really need it? You can ask 1 million consumers if you're going to use it. They're like, oh yeah, I'll use that. But they're actually not going to use it because they might not actually link their preference with the actual behavior. So having that kind of always consumer centric, at least especially for food and bev or like any kind of consumer facing good, is really important in my opinion. And from my very casual research of startups, consumer startups that have kind of failed or succeeded, I think the difference has been how do you connect with the consumers in a unique and authentic way. So
yeah, absolutely. For yourself here at HBS, more specifically, you're about to graduate. What do you feel is an experience that is vital that you recommend for future students to kind of really take advantage of or really embrace during their time here?
Right. That's a good question. There's so many good experiences. There's also bad ones. I think the typical answer would be a trip. So I'm trying to like not be typical. But I think at HBS, you're in a class of 900 to 1,000 people, right? Especially during RC year, as you come in and you're trying to find community and find groups of people that you get along with. You're meeting 1 million people at the same time. You have dinners every day for months. At least that's what I have had. And if I look back on myself, I wish I could kind of remove myself from that pressure that I need to make 500 friends at business school and really hone in on those people who I share a value with, my values with, and deepen that connection with them throughout the 2 years. I think I have certain people in the HBS class I really want to get close to, but because of the fact that I'm meeting catching up with so many people at the same time. The frequency at which I can meet with these people that I want to build a connection with is like once a month, once every 2 months. So it's hard because you can't really remove that pressure from yourself because you're trying to network, you're trying to recruit, you're trying to meet your section mates, you're trying to find community. So as best as you can, like pick and choose your battles. It's okay to say no, and get coffee with your friends, and like it doesn't have to be about business all the time.
Right. Absolutely. Well, I think we learned a lot here, and I really appreciate your time and for appearing on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. It was very good.
You as well.
Thanks.